All right. Well, it's good to see everybody as we're now in June. We had a couple of weeks off because we had 5 Tuesdays in May, so that always kind of throws things off. So we're glad to be back on our Truth Seekers first and third Tuesdays. And so if you're watching online, we're glad that you've joined us. Today, one of the things that we always try to do is we always try to follow our principles, and the things that we talk about are not always, especially on our Truth Seekers night, not always things that you typically talk about on a Sunday morning or maybe even at church. It's kind of like we know those things are going on, but they don't fit into the church ministry. However, I think we need to expand our understanding of what falls under a biblical worldview. And one of the things that we try to do, the second principle is that we are compelled to engage our society and leaders in defense of the truth against any evil ideology designed to sow chaos, division, and destruction. And so today, that's kind of what we're going to be talking about. I would encourage you, if you have the opportunity and are bored for 35, 40 minutes, to listen to the sermon on Sunday. We kind of talked about kind of a continuation of what we're going to discuss tonight. And that was the LGBT agenda that we're seeing all around us. It's been there for a long time, but it's heightened, right? Kind of like everything, because I believe we're in a open spiritual battle, and there's different ways that manifests itself. And so we're going to discuss that a little bit today, and today from a little bit different angle, because I know that there are many, and Christians as well, it's a tough subject, because the moment that you come out and you start talking about sexuality, people immediately think, oh, you're just uncomfortable with that, you're just bigoted towards people that are different than you, why are you bringing this up? Just let people live the way they want to live, which I kind of agree with that to a certain point. However, it's changed, right? It's being forced in a very interesting way, and so we're going to kind of look a different way that it's being forced upon us tonight. And I wanted to start off again with this clip. I think I've referenced it before. I don't think I've shown it. This is a guy named Dennis Prager. He is very conservative. And he's on the Bill Maher show. This is in 2019. So again, how fast things have changed. This is a good way to kind of show how quickly things have changed. And so what he's talking about that leads up into this clip, he's talking about the left, and he's very careful. He distinguishes between left and liberal. He's like, no, the left is further out there. And talking about the lies that they do, things that they believe that are just not true. And so in his discussion, he says, for example, the left, there are many that believe men can menstruate, right? So this is in 2019, him saying this. I want you to look, if you don't know who Bill Maher is, he is a liberal host for sure, that kind of uses humor and likes to make fun of conservatives and things like that. And so the other people there are also left. And look at their reaction to him saying something that now we hear all the time, right? And unfortunately, many people accept as fact. But look at their reaction even in 2019.
To say that men can menstruate is a lie, and that is what is said.
Wait, where did that
You've never heard it, right? Okay, check it out. Anyone who says a man cannot menstruate is considered transphobic.
I missed this whole story.
You did?
I did. Tell me where you're getting this.
Just Google it. Can men menstruate?
Who is saying this? You're talking about a very small percentage.
Oh, really?
Dennis, I remember you in the old show. You were a little more reasonable. I
What did I say that wasn't under you?
You said that we think that men menstruate and no one does. We never even. Have you heard about it?
I'm a doctor.
I missed that one, I confess.
And this is one of the premier reporters. I mean, he knows everything. These people are very. He's a doctor.
Okay.
He's one of the
I would
great
make a friendly bet that the LGBTQ normative statement is men can menstruate.
Now, again, that was in 2019. They thought he was crazy because that's a crazy statement, right? So the predominant liberal kind of a talk show, if you will, thought that is insane. Well, we're completely there, right? And now if you want to be part of the liberal-leaning view in our society, you agree with that statement now, that 4 years ago it was just laughed at. And as I was thinking about that, and one of the challenges we're running into is that our society, our system of government, is not equipped to handle this divergent of moral truths. John Adams, you've probably seen this before, he's talking about differences between other countries. He's talking about morality. And at the end of it, he gets to this point that he says, this country will be the most miserable habitation in the world because we have no government armed with power capable of contending with human passions unbridled by morality and religion. So he's saying if we move away from morality, from religion, from God, we will be the most miserable habitation in the world because our government's not capable of that. Avarice, ambition, revenge, or gallantry would break the strongest cords of our Constitution as a whale goes through a net. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. And it says it is widely inadequate to the government of any other, or wholly inadequate to the government of any other. That's a scary statement when we now find ourselves in a place where the morals diverge as great as they are, right? And so now it's an uncomfortable place for someone who is a small government guy, which, by the way, all the founders were small government people, right? In fact, their fights were not they were not our fights. They were fights of, wait, is the government too big with adding that, right? They went from the Articles of Confederation to Constitution, and those were the main fights. We want to make sure this government is too small. And they did recognize that this isn't going to be able to handle it if people become immoral and completely detached from moral truth that's based on a biblical worldview. Well, we are there now, and now it's tough, right? Because there's things that I'm wanting the government to do to fight back against what I believe is clearly immoral. But by doing that, that means the government is going to become bigger, and I don't want that, right? So it's a tough place that we're in. But one thing that happens whenever you become immoral is not only do you start embracing things like this LGBTQ agenda, you also become very corrupt, and the system begins to be used in very corrupt ways. And so you may ask yourself, as I have asked myself, how is it now that nearly without exception, any large corporation now participates somehow in Pride Month, right? There's different levels for sure, but how is that? How did that all of a sudden happen? And it's not a natural progression. There are things behind that. And again, whenever you become a country that is detached from morality, detached from religion, systems begin to be used for corrupt means. And And one thing that's important for us to understand is we need to understand not only the spiritual aspect of this, but also of how that spiritual blindness is being used to force people to accept this. So I want to show a clip. This is kind of went viral again. It actually is from 2017. And so we're going to get into a couple of things that are behind this. And this is an interview with a guy named Larry Fink. He's the CEO or whatever of BlackRock, which is a huge investment company. Right? And you know, this is beyond my purview, but I understand the basics, right? They take a lot of people money, right, and investment funds, and then they buy stock in other companies, right, so that then you can retire wealthy. that's their point. However, he has a little bit different idea, and they control trillions of dollars, right, and then they can invest that in other companies. Listen to his view of how they should use those investments.
You now make a point of that's an investment criteria for you.
Well, behaviors are going to have to change, and this is one thing we're asking companies. You have to force behaviors, and at BlackRock we are forcing behaviors. 54% of the incoming class are women. We added 4 more points in terms of diverse employment this year, and what we are doing internally is if you don't achieve these levels of impact, your compensation could be impacted. Okay,
we're doing the same thing.
And so it's just you have to force behaviors, and if you don't force behaviors, whether it's gender or race or just any way you want to say the composition of your team, you're going to be impacted, and that's not recruiting, it is development, as Ken said. And ultimately, it's still going to take time, but I am just as much shocked as Ken is that we have not seen more opportunities, and we're going to have to force change.
That should be a little disturbing to you, right? Because, again, our Constitution is not equipped to handle that type of immorality. Now you can say, well, maybe he's going to force good behavior, so what's wrong with that? Well, whose definition of good behavior are you getting into? And what's interesting is this was in 2017, and it's only grown since then. And now you may have heard, and it's interesting, anytime the media says things are conspiracy theories, I used to believe that. Now I believe, oh, then that's just something that's true. But over the last few years, you may have heard of ESG, and that was called a conspiracy theory. Well, it's not. And what he was talking about is how ESG works. ESG is basically a credit score that can be applied to companies, or it can be applied to individuals as well. But right now, it's companies. And it is out there, and now these investment companies are looking at ESG scores for people who they're going to invest in. Does that make sense? So just like a credit score has certain criteria, they look at whether you've paid on time. You know, they look at your income and your outcome to give you a credit score. Well, that's what ESG is, except it's looking at a lot of different factors. I just Googled ESG and just hit images. It is amazing how many clips there are of companies that are showing this, right? And they all have a little bit different definitions whenever it gets a little narrows down. But overall, it's environmental, social, governance. So they look at these companies and they first look, okay, what's their environmental aspect of their ESG score? That is going to include climate change, emissions, waste management, that type of stuff, right? This is how ExxonMobil, BlackRock was their largest, owned more with them than anybody else. They actually were able to flip 2 of the board of directors seats on ExxonMobil, And ExxonMobil went from their kind of mission statement to, produce, as much oil as we can to be as environmentally friendly as we can. Why would they do that, right? Well, it's this ESG score, right? And then the governance is, gets to the board of directors, diversity on the board of directors. Not all of the stuff is bad, right? That's usually how things are, is there's decent stuff in there, but then there's some things that are really scary. So the governance of the board. But what I want to focus on tonight is the social aspect. And so that's where you get human capital, the employee relations, community impact. So how is that corporation impacting their community positively? So you may say, well, how do you come up with a score like that? Because that's difficult, right? So what happens is somebody comes up with a with a metric that, and this doesn't even have to be official. It just all of a sudden people start adopting it, and it becomes kind of the rule, right? And so the metric that is being used for this, the S, is called this. It's the Corporate Equality Index. It is from the Human Rights Campaign Foundation. The Human Rights Campaign Foundation has been around for a long time. Started off advocating for gay rights. It's one of the largest advocacy groups out there. Now you go on their website, it is all about transgender stuff. And what they have done, they've created a CEI score. And so there's just about, I think, every one of the Fortune 500 companies are on this. 2,000 corporations have not partnered with them, but basically said, here's our information, give us a score, because they'll give you a score anyway, right? And these scores represent, okay, how well are they handling issues that we care about, right? And here are some of those issues. This was in 2022. I want to just show some of the old, and here's what it's going to be. So you have transgender inclusive healthcare benefits. There's a total of like 100 points. By the way, places like Target had 100-point score. For that to happen, they're following all of these, right? And so transgender inclusive healthcare. So it just costs about healthcare that you provide health insurance and things like that. This is interesting change in 2023. Now it includes puberty blockers for youth. You need to be including, that's part of what your inclusive plan needs to have. It also, you need to have 5 of the following essential services and treatments: hair removal, laser treatment, hair removal required for reconstructive surgery, facial feminization surgeries, voice modification therapy. Do you see how quickly things are moving? And this is a outreach and engagement to the community, right? Specifically the LGBT community, including at least 3 of these. And so, I mean, we're not going to go through all of them, but basically you have to have marketing and advertising directed to that community. You also have to have advertising that includes that community. Think of Bud Light. You think, why would they be so stupid? Because they're following this. And you can go down some dark rabbit holes as you think about this pretty deep. But this is the new criteria. It says now it's moved from 3 to 5 of these. So you have to do all of this. And demonstrated, the bottom one, demonstrated public support for the LGBTQ plus equality under the law, philanthropic support of at least one. Guess what's happened since all this stuff with Bud Light has blown up? They have given $200,000, I believe, to this group because they have to philanthropically support this movement as well in order to get the score where it needs to be. This is just kind of an overview. Trying to think of any of the bottom internal trainings and education best practices. So you wonder, why are all these companies all of a sudden making everyone go through these trainings and diversity trainings? That's what is being pushed. This is for this year. They keep expanding, right? It keeps growing. And then it says 5 distinct efforts of outreach or engagement to the broader LGBTQ community, and it just goes on and on. Now, you may say, well, how do they really have any real power? And they don't, except that people have given into it. So you have most of your large banks, everything like that, now look at the ESG score. A lot of these companies, they may be fine in the big picture, but a lot use short loans for payroll, or we're doing a marketing campaign. We know it's not going to pay off right away, but we're going to take out this short loan, and we know, well, what if now you lose access to that because your ESG score is not high enough? And so you just we'll just give into it. Now, we think about Target. Target, I just looked at their top, the top shareholders in Target. Because you think, Target, why would you do that? Now, I believe Target's a true believer. They love this stuff. They would do it whether there was an ESG score. And that's important for us to understand. There's some companies that are actually being held hostage, which is a major issue. And then there's some that are doing it because they truly believe in it. I believe Target truly believes in it. However, if you look at their top shareholders, Vanguard, which is just like BlackRock, it's the Vanguard, BlackRock, and State Street are the top 3 investment capital groups. So they are within the top 4. Those 3 have 9, 7.5%. So 25% of the shares of Target are owned by those 3 people who follow closely the ESG, which uses the CEI to determine whether they're going to be valuable or not. I did a quick look at Capital World Investors and saw quite a bit of ESG stuff on them eventually. Bank of America, huge into that, uses ESG score. Wells Fargo, also JP Morgan Chase, also, I'm assuming the others as well. So you may say, well, Target's doing things that are hurting its customers. No, it's not. It's doing things to keep its score where it's supposed to be. And in fact, now you're seeing backlash because they tried to change things, and now they're being threatened. Their score is going to be lowered because they're not defending the LGBT community enough. And that's happening into Bud Light as well. Now, why even bring all of this up? One, I think it's important for us to know what really is happening. That this is a spiritual issue, but it's much bigger than that. This is corruption at the highest level. This is racketeering. This is. I mean, you look how the mob used to work. This is how, right? The mob goes and smashes out windows of the mom and pop store, and then comes to the mom and pop store and says, "Hey, I think you need some protection. Why don't you pay us for protection?" Right? And if they say no, the mob just keeps destroying them until they pay them for protection. Right? And then whenever someone questions it, it's like, "Oh, well, we're just protecting them." Well, that's what's happening with this. And it's important to know that because, one, we need to recognize what's going on. Two, this is illegal. These companies are being forced to not look after the interest of their shareholders. Right? And now I'm not a lawyer, but I'm sure there can be lawsuits, and there probably will be. I know that there's starting to be some work on this. We need to be praying that it happens. We also need to be thinking, okay, we may not like the government to get too involved, this is something the government should be getting involved in. There are a lot of companies that are being held hostage and doing things that they don't necessarily believe in because they feel like that's the only thing that they have to do. And it's easy to say, well, just stand up and do the right thing. But if you don't, you get bombarded, right? And so it's an interesting situation, and I think it's important for us as Christians to recognize how corrupt things are getting. And we do need to think about, who are we voting for? What do they support? Do they recognize some of this? I can remember I asked a Texas state senator at a little gathering with Bastrop County conservatives. I asked him about ESG, and he was like, "Oh yeah, we don't allow that. You know, we protect our oil investments." Okay, well, good, but there's E, S, and a G, and it's coming hard and fast, and we're behind the game. And I think we need to be praying about this. We need to be supporting those who stand up. But just, again, recognize the spiritual battle doesn't just impact spiritual things. It infects a society, and it infects institutions. And our institutions, unfortunately, because I don't think let's see, what is that quote by John Adams? It says, I don't think we're the most miserable habitation in the world yet, but we're kind of moving that direction, and we're kind of exporting this stuff across the world, right? And he's right. Our Constitution on its own isn't equipped to handle this because, you know, the social contract means you both agree to pay attention to the Constitution, and there are many who do not. And so I encourage you to think about this, that the spiritual battle encompasses much more than just what we talk about in church, much more than just the culture wars. It's institutional, and eventually that can become very dangerous to what it does to the church as an institution. You know, and we're seeing a creep towards a very dangerous place. So I encourage you to continue to pray. And the good thing is, if we know the problem, maybe we can do things to try to help stop the problem, right? And there still is that possibility, not only through spiritual revival, but through being active in our political process that hopefully will stand up against some of these things that are certainly go against the intentions of our founders, for sure, and definitely go against a biblical worldview. All right, well, thank you so much for joining us. We'll be here if you'd like to join us on Tuesdays and first and third Tuesdays. We sit here and talk about other things after we're finished, and so you're always welcome to come and join us. So we'll see you next time.